Do you ever wonder what's really going on in government, locally, in the state of Tennessee, and across the country? I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson, and on Tennessee Today, we dive into the issues that shape our communities, from local policy to national debates. Each episode, I break down key topics and issues, share my perspective from over 20 years in the Tennessee legislature, and talk with guests about the decisions that impact your daily life. I hope you enjoy these honest conversations and that they help you stay informed and engaged. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Tennessee Today wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Hey folks, this is Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. On Tennessee Today, Justice Kirby and I talked about the judicial system in Tennessee and the difference between the state court system and the federal court system. We talk about the fact that we really don't have enough legal representation to support all of the people who need legal representation across the state. And we talk about different decisions that may have been made at the Supreme Court level. I hope you'll tune in and listen. It's a really interesting conversation. I think you'll learn a lot. I guess you're from Memphis, right?
I am. And let me say at the outset, Chairman Watson, I am just thrilled to be here. I saw that you had kicked off your reelection campaign, and technically I can't endorse, but you and I go way back, and I respect you so much. So I'm excited to be here on your podcast.
Well, that's very kind. That's a cut. We'll be done. We'll go move on to the next episode now. Now, let me get this. I'm a little bit, let's talk about the Tennessee Supreme Court for just a second, and then we'll talk about your education background, how you got there. But for those that are listening to this that are really unfamiliar, and most people are totally unfamiliar with the Tennessee Supreme Court, tell the audience a little bit about how it's structured, how it comes into being, how you get there, that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the structure first. Our country, of course, has a federal system and a state system, parallel systems. At the head of the federal system is the U.S. Supreme Court, with Chief Justice John Roberts and all the cases on the news, on the national news that everybody sees. There are intermediate appellate courts, and then there are trial courts. The state system is aligned exactly the same. There are trial courts that people are familiar with, general sessions courts, circuit courts, and so forth. There are intermediate appellate courts, and the Tennessee Supreme Court is our state's highest court. It's what's called a court of last resort, and that means on issues of state law, we are the final word. And the Tennessee Supreme Court also runs the judicial branch of state government. So we handle the big cases and are largely the final word on it, unless occasionally there's an issue of federal law that can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. But on most cases, we're the last word. And we also run the judicial branch of government.
Yeah, one of the big differences, you're structured similar, your court systems are structured different. But one of the biggest differences, or perhaps the biggest difference, is at the federal level, the Supreme Court justices are appointed, and they're appointed for life. At the state court level, the justices are elected for 8-year terms. Is that right? Is it 8 years?
That's right. Tennessee actually has, different states have different systems. In some states, there's state Supreme Court. People just sign up to run and are on a ballot, and they run in a big money election. Tennessee has a unique system that I think is the sweet spot, where the members of the Tennessee Supreme Court are appointed by the governor, confirmed by the legislature, and then they are on the ballot for the people to approve. And the voters get to approve the justices every 8 years. So it's a long enough term to give the members of the Supreme Court some independence, but not too much independence from the voters.
Yeah, and people in the audience may not know, but there's actually and has been for a while a sort of an ongoing discussion at the federal level as to whether federal judges, whether appointing people for life is actually the best way, even though that's the way the framers of the Constitution made it. There's been discussion that perhaps that's a system that they should be given a certain amount of time that they would be appointed for, rather than not necessarily be elected, but have, you're going to serve for 10 years and then it's time to get, somebody new. Matter of fact, you and I had our first encounter, I guess, with each other was a discussion about how we selected Tennessee judges. I contended at that time that the Constitution said y'all were supposed to be elected, and that the system that we were using wasn't really met my definition of election. We ended up coming back and fixing the Constitution, and so that's all. You and I are now square with each other on that. But in that vein, do you remember, did Tennessee's original Constitution set up election of judges, or was that a post-Jacksonian era kind of thing?
As best I can remember, back to the original Constitution in 1796, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was set up so that they were elected, and at that point, it was just the Supreme Court and the trial courts, and I think that same system for both.
Yeah. So, folks who don't know, our Constitution that we currently operate under was drafted in 1869, I think, or approved in 1869. But there were a couple of iterations before that, and one of them was kind of in that Jacksonian period. And of course, Jackson was a huge proponent for electing like virtually everybody, even though we don't elect everybody. He was a big advocate for that kind of democratization of the electorate. So anyway, you listen to cases that involve state law, right?
Correct.
Do you ever have a case that you rule on at the state level that is picked up by the federal Supreme Court?
On issues of state law, we are the last word. The U.S. Supreme Court cannot overturn us when we are interpreting state law, either our common law or interpreting Tennessee statutes or interpreting the Tennessee Constitution. It only comes into play when we have some overlap in our system. Sometimes our cases might involve questions of federal law. Sometimes the federal courts will have cases where they are applying our state law. Probably a good example of our court applying federal law is in criminal cases, because under the federal Constitution, there are many rights that criminal defendants have. And so if we were to interpret those rights under the federal Constitution in a way that the United States Supreme Court didn't agree with, they could take the case and reverse us on that.
I think it's really important because we've talked about on my show here a lot about federalism and the difference between state and federal, and actually local, state, and federal government. And I think one of the big things you point out is that, the state Supreme Court has final jurisdiction on laws that are pertaining to our state, and Kentucky's Supreme Court for Kentucky, and et cetera, and that the federal system does not have the ability to just intervene any time that they choose. There has to be specific reference or specific relationship to a federal statute for that to occur, if I've heard you correctly.
That's right.
So I could never be a judge, by the way. Well, for a number of reasons. One, I'm not qualified, but I could never be a judge because, and tell me if I'm wrong, but you spend an inordinate amount of just kind of studying, right? Reading old stuff and new stuff and just studying all the time, right?
Yes. Being a judge on a trial court is a much different experience, because you got a lot coming at you and you have to decide this, then move on to the next one, then move on to the next one. We're set up so that when somebody is unhappy with what happens at the trial court level, they can appeal it. And so we look at the record, which is generally a written record, sometimes recorded, and we're taking the time to study those cases to see if what the trial court did was correct. So the time that trial judges don't have, because they just have so much incoming that they have to decide and move on, we our job is to take the time and do the study needed to correct it.
But you look at like previous decisions that are similar to this or previous cases to support it, and just like the people would think of the U.S. Supreme Court doing. I mean, and you base your opinions, and those of us in the legislature always like to point out that y'all are just giving us an opinion, but that's neither here nor there. You base your opinions on previous findings, current law, the interpretation of current law, et cetera, just like our federal Supreme Court.
Right.
So does someone wake up in the morning, a junior in high school, and go, I want to be a Tennessee Supreme Court justice?
Well, somebody might wake up in high school and think, I want to be a judge someday, but not necessarily imagining oneself on the Tennessee Supreme Court.
So did you wake up one day in, I guess, college or after college and go, this engineering thing really isn't working for me. I think I want to go to law school and become a Supreme Court justice?
Well, you're not too far off. Surprisingly, when I was in high school, I did know that I wanted to be a lawyer. I wasn't thinking judge at that point, and I'd never met a lawyer. Didn't have any in my family. When I was in college, I started thinking I might want to be a judge. And I actually confided to my college boyfriend that I might want to be a judge someday. And he thought it was hilarious. And he told all his fraternity brothers, and they had a big laugh. And, in all candor, Senator Watson, it was a little preposterous because this was way back before Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman on the U.S. Supreme Court. Margaret Thatcher was not yet Prime Minister of England. It was a little preposterous, and I had no political connections, nothing like that.
Yeah, but you know what, Justice Kirby, you fast forward to where we are today, we have 5 justices and 3 of them are women.
That's right.
Yeah, anybody that wants to say that Tennessee, we're kind of backwoods people, need to look at our Supreme Court and realize that it's based on merit around here. And if you're good, we don't care what your sex, your race, your gender, we don't care. If you're good, you're going to get credit for being good, right?
Well, fortunately now, being a woman as a judge or a lawyer, nobody even notices, which is exactly the way it ought to be. It's just based on merit.
Yeah. So but you were a mechanical engineering major, right? Did I read that right?
That is correct.
I'm trying to get inside your head here. That's what we do on this show. We get inside your head and we move the pieces around a little bit to try and figure you out. So you're a mechanical engineer, which means you're in like a different college. I mean, you're in the engineering school, right?
That's right. Now, this was in undergraduate school. So, it was before law school. I actually knew I wanted to go to law school, but I come from a background with no money at all. My dad was a traveling salesman. My mother was a secretary, and we didn't have money for any of that, and didn't have money for college. I knew I was going to have to pay my own way through college, and they were heavily recruiting women in engineering, and I was good at math and science. So I said, I believe I'm going to be an engineering major, and they gave me a fat scholarship. It actually turned out to be a really cool training for a lawyer because you're very well trained in logic and analysis. They're actually both very much problem-solving disciplines where there are some unknowns and you have to make assumptions and so forth. And so it worked out as it's a different language, of course, than law is, but it's a surprisingly similar process. And I find myself using the brain training every day that I got as an engineer.
Well, you warm my heart because I was a science major, and I tell people all the time that I think that the way science majors, and I guess I'll throw engineering majors into that bucket, the way we are taught to think actually helps us analyze things in a different way than someone who was trained in the liberal arts analyzes things. And I think that's a good thing. On the bad side of it, I think we always kind of look for, like, there has to be a single answer to this problem, right? Because you do a math problem, there aren't, like, liberal arts majors, they can come up with 10 different answers that all seem to be right. Whereas a math major, no, there's only one answer. And I think those of us that are trained to think scientifically have sometimes a hard time understanding that there can be multiple answers to multiple correct answers to a single problem. So you go to engineering school, but you're really in law school in your head, right? And so obviously, you obviously were a good student, but were you taking some criminal justice classes or English classes? I'm trying to think of the courses that my lawyer buddies took. Most of them were the easiest courses in college, if I remember correctly. That's supposed to be funny,
Yeah.
but I guess the lawyers won't think it's funny. But anyway.
Yeah. But no, actually, I ended up, for my electives, I ended up taking the hardest writing and political science and debate courses that there were so that I would get enough training for law school. So I was taking all the engineering courses, and then other people were taking basket weaving for their electives. I was taking the hardest political science and debate and English writing courses.
I've got to believe that when you submitted your application to law school, that they looked and they went, okay, mechanical engineering degree, she's in. Next candidate, please, because that's pretty powerful. Where'd you go to law school?
I got a scholarship I went to the University of Memphis for both undergraduate and for law school, and they have a particular type of scholarship, a HERF scholarship, that pays not only tuition but living expenses and that sort of thing. And I was able to use that for both undergraduate and for law school.
So where did you grow up?
In Memphis until I was about 15, and then I moved to Columbia, Tennessee, the dimple of the universe, and I graduated from high school from Columbia Central High. So I sort of claim two hometowns, both Memphis and Columbia, and they both fit squarely in my heart.
So, for people who don't know, Columbia is what, south of Nashville? That'd be a fair way to...
Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, kind of.
That's right.
Yeah, it's in Middle Tennessee. So were you a district level judge before you became a Supreme?
I never got to be a trial judge. I think I would have loved it. But in 1995, Governor Don Sundquist appointed me to the Tennessee Court of Appeals. So I went from practicing law in Memphis to being on Tennessee's Court of Appeals.
So you guys get to do some interesting work. You look at some of the things that we do. Most of it, I'd say, if it comes out of the legislature, you probably look at it and go, well, this is probably brilliant because the legislators have put it together.
Always.
What are some of your most notable do you have any cases that stick out in your mind that you can discuss that you're like, oh, this is one I'm really proud of?
I don't know that there's, I've literally just participated in thousands and thousands of cases, and so many of them are interesting. It's probably what sticks out for me more than anything. Senator Watson is not a particular case, but how many children are in our court system in one way or another, typically as victims. That is probably the most striking to me. When I was on the Court of Appeals, I handled a lot of cases involving termination of parental rights, which is, for any penalty, it's the closest thing to the death penalty if you lose custody of your children. And dependency and neglect cases. And then, of course, on the Supreme Court, I hear criminal cases, and so many children are caught up as victims in criminal cases. So that's probably the thing that sticks out to me the most.
Yeah, I don't think people think about that. Why do you think that is? I'm kind of curious on this thread of children. Why do you think is that true of your colleagues in other states? Do other state Supreme Courts deal with a lot of I'll call it child and family law?
I think the answer to that, sadly, is yes, because children are vulnerable and they're helpless. And not everybody out there is a good person. And they just end up being victimized in a lot of different, sometimes it's by their own parents who are warring with each other or can't get their own lives together well enough to take care of their children or take out their frustrations on their children. And sometimes it's just criminals who see a child as a potential victim, and they're so helpless that they can't defend themselves, so they get caught up in it.
So this is a great teachable moment for me, actually, because I'm trying in my mind trying to think through this. Because when I think of the Supreme Court, I think of it ruling on an issue, the constitutionality of an issue. But it sounds like y'all do those kind of cases, but you also do just, I'm not sure what the legal term is. It's not prosecutorial, but y'all do other kinds of cases that aren't just about interpreting the Constitution. Did I hear you right on that, or did I misunderstand what these child and family cases are about?
You're exactly right. Because what ends up happening is in many child welfare cases, we're applying the statutes that you in the legislature craft for us. And so statutes are applied to a lot of different facts. And when the stakes are high, like, for example, when somebody's going to lose custody of their children, making sure that the trial courts are applying those statutes the right way is super important. So we take a good number of those cases just to make sure that they are being applied in an even-handed way. And likewise, in criminal cases, for example, children are a challenge in terms of testifying and in terms of making sure that things are fair for the criminal defendant, but the victim is nevertheless heard. Uh, there might be a child who's a victim who's pre-verbal, 2 years old, when injuries are inflicted on that child. How do you prove? The child may say some things to someone. Has the child been coached? All that sort of thing. And so they're just unique challenges with having child victims and how to prove what happened to them and who did it. So we do take a lot of those cases.
Yeah. And now I'm assuming that you have a large number of cases that are appealed to you, but you only select certain cases. How do y'all go about that process? And then do y'all use the same system that the federal system does, where the Chief Justice assigns the cases to a particular justice to write the opinion on it? How do y'all do that?
Yeah. I'll answer that last question first. Yes, the Chief Justice assigns the cases for the opinions to be written. Sometimes that'll change because we might have a conference about a case and we think we're headed one way, and when you really dig in the record, it goes another way, or somebody changes their mind. But the Chief Justice assigns the opinions. In Tennessee's system, if somebody's not happy with what happened at the trial court level, they have a right to appeal to our intermediate level appellate court. I was on the Court of Appeals before. People had an absolute right to appeal to the Court of Appeals. But once it goes up to the Supreme Court, then we generally grant permission to appeal. And that's only a small slice of cases. It has to be an important case, a case where maybe the lower courts are disagreeing on how to interpret a statute, a problem that we've been seeing over and over again, a rule of evidence that's an issue that we need to decide, that sort of thing. So we'll look at different issues in deciding whether to grant permission to appeal.
In the modern world with social media and all the paths that people get their information from. How does the judiciary maintain the public trust? That's because that's a very delicate. That's something that's very delicate is the public trust. What does the court do to maintain that? That's a hard question, really, but
Yeah, no, it is a it's a it's a difficult issue because generally courts operate differently than the other branches of government. The legislature and the governor will decide, I have an initiative that I think this is important for Tennessee. I'm going to pursue policy initiatives related to this topic. The courts take the cases that are brought to them. So we don't have any control over it. It means that we handle sometimes cases that are dynamite. There's no good way to resolve it, or maybe the right way to resolve it under the law is not going to be well understood by the public. So, really, the best way that we can earn public trust is day in and day out, applying the rules very fairly to the people who are in front of us, explain it in our decisions as best we can. But honestly, when the court system is under attack in ways that are unfair, for example, if we're painted as political actors when we're just trying to call the balls and the strikes the way the law requires us to, um, we're not in a great position to say, well, no, you're wrong. I can't call a press conference and say, no, I'm not a political actor. I just have to keep doing my job and hope that either others will step in and say, no, that attack is unfair. And what you are saying is undermining our justice system, and that people will see over time that the courts sometimes have to rule in favor of people who are not popular.
have you seen in your time, how long have you been on the Supreme Court?
I went on the Supreme Court in 2014.
2014, so 10 years, roughly. So in that 10 years, has the court, I'm not really sure how to phrase the question other than do courts, different composition of court members, do they look at the law differently? Like a court of today, a Supreme Court in Tennessee today, as compared to a Tennessee Supreme Court 25 years ago, given the same statute to interpret, would they look at it differently today, do you think?
Somewhat. When I first became a judge, there were uh, a number of judges, and the Tennessee Supreme Court, I'll just say candidly, was one of them, who would interpret the Constitution, for example, in a way that aligned with policy, their personal policy preferences, I'll put it that way. And really would not explain those decisions in terms of the text of the Constitution or even the history of the Constitution. It was more based on what those justices felt was most fair and right to them from a policy standpoint. So I felt very strongly that judges were not uh, put in place to enforce their own policy objectives, and felt very strongly that we needed to ground our decisions in the the text of the Constitution, the intent of the legislature in enacting the statutes, the policy decisions that the legislature and the governor adopt. And, sometimes that means interpreting a statute that really, if I were a legislator, I would never adopt. Uh, but it means that I need to defer to them. And so I think there's been a real evolution in Tennessee, and most all of our judges in Tennessee now are aligned with recognizing that policy decisions and statutes and initiatives belong to the executive and the legislative branches, and the judges are there to enforce the laws.
Yeah. Well, as a conservative East Tennessean, I would, of course, applaud you for that because, that's what we would see your role, somewhat of my political ideology. And of course, we're the political branch. That's what we would expect to see from our Supreme Court is, I'm not really interested in what your opinion is. I'm interested in you interpreting the law based on the Constitution and the history of Tennessee and all that kind of stuff. So that's refreshing to hear. I think to the audience, the justice or the way the justice system may have been exercised 25 years ago or more is, in my world, we would say they were more activists. They were using the Supreme Court position to sort of further an agenda that may or may not have been supported by the statute or may not have been supported by the Constitution. That's Bo Watson speaking. That's not Justice Kirby speaking. So I understand that you have announced that you're going to be retiring.
I have.
I'm sad to hear that. Oh, I wanted to go one more thing on the trust of the court. And this is purely an opinion question, but I guess some could argue or would argue that the election, the way the justices are elected, helps tamp down some of that activist activity because you are held accountable in our system to the decisions that you make, right?
Yes, and I personally have seen that. I can see the reasons why the founders would give the federal courts lifetime tenure. I can understand that. And I do think that the independence of judges is very important. But I've also seen federal judges act as though they were kings and rule in cases in ways that made it clear that they felt they answered to absolutely no one. And so I think that Tennessee's system really hits the sweet spot where there is accountability to voters. If you've got just a rogue judge who is not appropriately enforcing the law, a campaign can be raised against that judge and that judge can be removed. So I think it's a great fail safe, but 8-year terms, an 8-year term is a long term of office. And so it gives judges enough independence to, you also don't want judges looking over their shoulder, afraid all the time in all their decisions that they're going to get bounced out of office. That's also not healthy for our system.
Yeah. So now we'll go back to you breaking my heart and retiring. So do you have any plans that you would share with the podcast listener? Or are you just going to take some time away and see what's the next chapter for Justice Kirby?
I don't know what the next chapter is. I know my husband is busily planning a trip to Italy for us after I retire.
What's up with Italy? Everybody I talked to 3 people today. And 2 of the 3 had been gone, and they'd been to Italy. And is there like a special deal to Italy? Everybody's getting a travel thing to Italy?
Well, I guess I'm going to find out because I haven't ever been, and so I was the one who asked for it. So I guess we'll find that out.
Apparently it's a hot spot because I got everybody I talk to is going to Italy right now. So that's cool. Well, good for you. So when does your retirement take effect?
I'll work through the end of June of 2026. So July 1, I'll be retired.
Okay, cool. So you've still got a full. Now, do y'all meet year round, or do y'all have like certain docket times that you work?
We'll generally try not to hold a docket in July to give people a little bit of a window to take a vacation. But the Tennessee Supreme Court. The reality is we work year round and weekends and nights too. So I think I'm looking forward to not having to check my email on Saturday night to see what somebody has sent out.
I hear you. Well, and to the listeners, if you come to the state capitol or Supreme Court, and actually you're getting ready to expand, we've cleared up some space in a building that y'all been yelling at me about for a number of years, and we're actually going to finally give you the space. You sit right next to the Capitol. There was a period of time when predates both you and me, but the Supreme Court was actually on the first floor of the state capitol, and people can still go up there today and see where the Supreme Court originally met, which that must have been interesting, having the governor down at one end of the hall, the Supreme Court down at the other end of the hall, and then upstairs the two legislative chambers. I bet that made for some interesting conversations, at least in the hallways back then.
It would have been pretty close quarters back then.
Well, and everybody smoking and the gaslit lights and all that kind of stuff. It must have been yeah. Good luck for your day in court in that crowd. But anyway, one simple fact about Tennessee state government that people do not realize, which is, I think, unique to Tennessee. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but our attorney general is actually appointed by our Supreme Court. The governor. I don't know if the governor is required to give you three choices, but they typically give you three people to choose from, and our Supreme Court actually selects our attorney general.
Tennessee is unique in that the Tennessee Supreme Court selects the attorney general. We're the only state with that system. I think it has served us well. And we actually get people that you do have to be a lawyer in order to apply to be attorney general.
Well, there you go. You see, I woke up this morning and said, I want to be attorney general, and now I can't be attorney general.
That's right. But we get just some excellent applicants from all over. It's not actually funneled through the governor. We can have anybody who is a licensed lawyer can apply. And so I feel very good about that system. I think that we've gotten really good applicants, and that the court generally has done a really good job of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I think, and I'm assuming this is in our original Constitution because it's such creative thinking, you would think that it's there, but we are one of the states that we just depoliticize the attorney general's position. Now, the attorney general may be political, but his position is not political. I mean, it's through our court system, and I think that is substantially different than those attorney generals who might run for statewide election and that kind of thing.
Yes, I think it actually has worked in the past quite well for Tennessee to have an AG who is not political, but just advises state government and does the best job representing state government that he can.
I was going to ask you, we hear a lot about lack of access to health care. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of that discussion going on now with the government shutdown about people don't have access to care. And of course, people can argue about this, but health care is not really mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. But legal stuff is. I mean, people are supposed to be able to have a legal defense, and there is a real shortage of people having access to I'll call it legal care or legal advice. Do you see that as a problem? And are there things in Tennessee that we're trying to do to address it?
It is a huge problem. Just as families can be upended by a healthcare crisis, they can also be upended by a legal crisis. Think of the family that is facing eviction. The father is arrested on criminal charges. All of the things that can happen that completely turn their world inside out. Some of those types of cases, under our Constitution, the state is required to pay for a lawyer. That's specifically in criminal cases and in child welfare cases like terminating parental rights. Tennessee actually, in the last legislative session, made a huge stride toward improving that system. We were having great difficulty finding lawyers who would take those cases for really a small amount of money. But our governor and legislature decided to support our initiative to implement a new system for indigent representation. And I think it's going to be eye-opening and innovative. We're going to experiment with different ways to contract with lawyers to make sure they have expertise and to really connect them to the people who need them. There's also a whole category of cases where the state is not required to pay for a lawyer, and people don't realize that. If you are evicted from your home, if you're involved in a divorce, if you're a victim of domestic uh, violence and you need to get out of the house and get a divorce, you don't have a right to have the state pay for your lawyer. So we have to ask lawyers to take that, what's called pro bono, which means for free. So that's a whole another set of challenges.
Why do you, because I mean, people look at healthcare as they often frame it around human rights and that kind of stuff. But I mean, and we talk about healthcare all the time, and I get all the warts on healthcare. I get it, and the insurance system and all that kind of stuff. But I've always been fascinated by the fact that we talk about that, but we never talk about the fact that, we can say, well, we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough hospitals, but we never talk about the fact that, we don't have enough lawyers, we don't have enough law clerks, we don't have enough judges for all of the cases that either come before you or for all the people that need representation. And yet that is kind of a constitutional thing. I just think it's interesting that we never really talk about that and it never gets the attention that it really deserves, because that is something in most cases that people are supposed to have a right to a defense. Because I think, you may not be guaranteed a lawyer, but I think if they stand up in front of Justice Kirby and say, I'm going to defend myself, Justice Kirby says, before you do that, let me give you some advice. You don't need to defend yourself, right? I mean, they need to hire professionally trained people the same way that a person would hire a physician to take care of their health care. I think it's fascinating that we have Medicare and Medicaid to cover health care problems, but we have no kind of system to cover for the legal care that people need.
I think you're spot on, and not to overdo your analogy, but really the court system in a way is like the emergency room for all of society's ills. If there is a problem in society, it will show up on the courthouse steps every time.
Yeah, I think it's so true. And I think the parallel between the two is real, in that the healthcare and the crisis that we face there and legal care and the crisis that we face there are very, very similar to each other.
Agree.
So last thing is, you are standing in front of that junior class of that student who's thinking about what they're going to do next. What's your advice to those students if they have the same kind of aspirations that you had when you were in high school and you were thinking about, I think I want to be a lawyer? What's your advice to them about first that career path, and then how you imagine getting to the level of success that you've experienced?
I would say that the law is really an incredibly satisfying profession. When I was practicing law, I was struck by how many people are caught up in cases, either because they're in some circumstance that requires them to file a case, or if they're named as a defendant in a case. It's a trauma. And as a lawyer, I got to advise them, guide them, hopefully resolve their problem for them, and let them get on with their lives. And likewise, as a judge, um, I'm adjudicating cases. The court system is here so that people won't resort to self help when they have a dispute with their fellow citizens. They won't just fight it out or duel with them or all the things that people used to do. Our system requires them to bring their dispute to the court system instead of self help. And it's really a privilege to be entrusted with trying to make a fair decision in the disputes that citizens bring to us. And so I would encourage that student to think about it and study hard. But the most helpful thing is to have a servant's heart in bringing it to the practice of law.
Well, that's a great way to close this out with very sage advice. Justice Kirby, it's been a thrill for me to have this conversation with you. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I did.
I look forward to see what great things, when you get back from Italy, what great things you have in store for the rest of the state of Tennessee.
Great. And thank you so much for having me. And I can't endorse again, but I'm definitely going to wish you well in your reelection.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining me on Tennessee Today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.